Hey guys, welcome back. Joe Brunsman, insurance broker to the stars. And if you have ever wondered how cyber insurance may or may not help your business if you fall victim to a ransomware event, this is the video for you. So let's go ahead and jump on into it. All right, no surprise here. Recent article, ransomware is the biggest concern for CISOs in 2021. These are some of the reasons behind that. Of course, I will leave a link in the description below to this specific article from ZDNet. But let's go ahead and jump into the insurance side. And I think there's going to be a lot of insurance elements in there that businesses have never really contemplated or thought about before. And so it makes it kind of very interesting. Now, before we do that, I really just want to say you probably only want to call me once a year. What do I mean by that? What I'm trying to say is insurance, specifically in this case, cyber insurance, that should not be the plan to deal with ransomware. Ideally, you have defense in depth and you're doing everything you reasonably can to try and avoid the problem. We can think of cyber insurance as like a reserve parachute. Obviously, you wouldn't jump out of a plane with only one parachute. You want multiple parachutes. So insurance should really kind of be that last resort, that last layer that you have there for response, not the first layer that you have of response. And increasingly, I made another video about this, but if you don't have those reasonable cybersecurity controls in place, you're going to have really drastic reductions in the sublimits available for ransomware, or you're not even going to get a quote at all. So make sure you're taking that cybersecurity control piece with the utmost respect and seriousness that it should deserve. All right, assuming all of that, these are some of the potential cyber policy elements you could find in a cyber policy to assist with ransomware. Now, I say potentially here because obviously, every policy is different. I'm not providing official insurance or legal advice. You really need to look at your own policy, but we're going to kind of go through what would be in, I think, a good cyber insurance policy. And these are some of the elements here. So you'll see attorney, forensics, negotiator, payment, restoration, business interruption, reputational harm, potential client notification, and credit monitoring, etc. Now, within each of these, they all play very unique and useful roles. And we're going to talk about what those roles are and how your business should think about this. So attorneys, what do they actually do? Well, besides being kind of the catch-all, there's a bunch of different elements that they can be involved in. So one that a lot of businesses don't necessarily think about until it's too late is any sort of contractual notices or obligations they may have. So this is outside of any regulatory or statutory requirement. It could be they have a contractual requirement to notify, say, vendors or clients if they fall victim to a ransomware attack, even if no, let's say PII, PHI, or PCI was actually absconded with. So with that, make sure that you're actually kind of understanding, okay, do we have any of these random contractual requirements out there? If so, it's pretty useful to have those printed out on a piece of paper somewhere so you know about this beforehand. That'll save you a lot of time following a ransomware event. Next, that attorney is going to deal with a bunch of the regulatory requirements. So let's say you fall under FTC or HIPAA high-tech or some sort of state requirement on the regulatory side. They're going to help you navigate that, notify those people as appropriate, work through that whole process. Not something you'd really want to do on your own. Next is going to be law enforcement. So liaisoning with any particular law enforcement agency that needs to be contacted. A lot of business owners are really hesitant, and I understand why. They don't want to go out there telling, local, state, and federal law enforcement, whether it's Secret Service, Department of Homeland Security, FBI, local sheriff's office, that their business fell victim to some sort of cyber event. But it's actually quite useful because what we're doing there is those entities that we need to help us fight this risk, they need to be able to legitimize increases in funding. So if we're withholding this information from these guys, when they go to those funding boards and they're trying to legitimize an increase in their own particular budget, they're just not going to have the ammunition to do that. There's also some stuff on the back end that they can try and assist with and also start, trying to coordinate and really dial down where they think these attacks are coming from to hopefully arrest those individuals if possible. B, if they come from some sort of other nation state that has no extradition treaty, sanctions can also be involved there as well. So very, very useful. And then, of course, dealing with the state-federal contacts. So if you have ever had the wonderful pleasure like I had of reading through all 50 different state and territory breach notification laws, one of the things you'll notice is there's just a hodgepodge of different requirements in there. So some states are going to have multiple agencies that have to be notified following a breach, potential, credit monitoring agencies that have to be notified. There's different thresholds, different names for all these offices. The attorney is going to be the one that's assisting with that. And they're really going to be, like I said before, that catch-all, that kind of guiding the process type person to really try and help your business navigate this entire process, because these are things that you simply do not want to do on your own. All right, next is going to be the forensics. And this is very, very important for a whole number of reasons. First of all, they're going to be determining the scope and nature of the breach. That's going to be really important, specifically if you have the ability to do something called a risk of harm analysis. So if you can determine the scope and nature of the breach, and you can say, hey, under the laws that we fall under, it says there has to be both access and acquisition. Well, if there was no acquisition, they just happened to access your network, we can see there was no weird outflow of information. It doesn't look like they were in here long enough to do anything particularly malicious in terms of extricating data. Well then, hey, maybe there's no notification required there. So that could be very useful for you. It also helps identify the particular malware strain, or tries to. That's going to be really important later on. We're going to talk about that, but make sure you keep that in mind. Next, this is super crucial. They're going to try and remove that offending piece of malware from your particular system. Why do you actually care about that? Well, really two things. One, let's talk about attack loops. The last thing you want is just to restore to backups, and somewhere in that backup is that malicious code, and then you just get hit again with ransomware. So I had a company approach me, and they were like, hey, we need to get cyber insurance. And I was like, okay, is there anything I should know about that happened to you previously? And they said, well, we actually got hit with ransomware 3 times. So the first time they got hit with ransomware, they were like, we're just going to restore to backups. They restored to backups. 30 days later, literally to the day, they got hit with another ransomware event. They were like, oh, we don't really know where this came from. They didn't have an appropriate cyber policy. No forensics had been involved. So then they just restored to backups again. They're like, maybe this was just a fluke of nature. We rolled the dice and we lost. Well, no, it turns out that the third time they got hit, they finally called in a forensic specialist, and they were able to actually remove that offending piece of malware, and the business could go back to business as necessary and keep generating revenue. The other thing you have to worry about is something called the double extortion event. A double extortion event would be where really kind of 2 potential areas here. One is they went in, they not only put ransomware on your system, but they also stole information from you. And those forensics guys could be able to give you kind of an interesting determination on if they think there was any strange outflow of information and if you should be potentially worried about a double extortion event. So when these bad guys are going in and they're not only hitting you with ransomware but stealing client information, they can either use that as leverage to make you pay the ransom, or they can actually go in and say, hey, we're going to ransom you again. So not only do you have to pay the ransom to unlock their files, but you have to pay the ransom to not have all of your all the files that they stole actually released on the internet somewhere in some deep dark hole. So pretty crucial that the forensics guys are actually involved there. Next is a negotiator, and a lot of people don't actually know this. So what does a negotiator do? Well, they try to lower the ransom amount if possible. Now, obviously, there's no guarantee there that they're actually going to lower that ransom payment, and there's no guarantee that the ransom payment will actually result in you getting the key to unlock your files. So with that, even if you get the key, there's no guarantee that the key is actually going to function. But this is really an economics argument. And I know that there's a lot of back and forth out there and a lot of FBI agents and various government officials saying, hey, never pay the ransom. You're just encouraging criminal activity. Well, that's pretty easy to say if you're a government employee and you are guaranteed a paycheck on the 1st and the 15th. Come hell or high water, you're going to get paid. But if you're a small, medium-sized business owner and you've got families to feed, you have like real human beings relying on that business continuing to operate, then it really becomes you speaking with the insurance company, and there's really an economic determination there, right? Because you're going to have some element of business interruption, but hey, if it's, we think there's a high probability that we're going to get the key to unlock these files, and if we don't do that, it's going to cost more for the insurance company to pay for that business interruption costs, with potentially any reputational harm there that could ensue from that. Well, then you may end up actually paying the ransom, and the negotiator will try and assist with that. All right, as previously noted, yes, your cyber insurance company may actually pay the ransom, and yes, it is a purely economic decision, not necessarily an ethical framework type decision. So when I say that they could potentially pay the ransom, it's a little more complicated than people realize. I made a video to this. I'll link to it right up above. And there are restrictions. So when that forensics guy came in and he tried to actually determine the strain of malware, well, various government departments actually have sanction lists. So if that piece of, say, ransomware or malware actually came from someone that's on the sanction list, you could be legally prohibited from actually paying the ransom because you're supporting a state sponsor of terrorism. Now, in my experience, that is exceedingly rare that that actually happens to an SMB, but it could potentially happen. So once again, that's another reason why, hey, defense in depth is actually going to be key there. The other thing you have to kind of consider here with the ransomware payment is various policies have kind of different rules that you have to play by. So some policies will say, hey, you have to demonstrate duress before this payment is made. Others say, hey, you have to have underwriter approval before the payment is made. Now, in most circumstances, obviously look at your own policy, your own rules that you have to play by. But in a lot of circumstances, it's kind of a moot point because you're going to have the insurance company involved anyways at this point. But if you do kind of find yourself in a unique situation where maybe your business is the one that's going to pay that particular ransom and then try and get reimbursement on the back end from the insurance company, make sure that you're actually playing by the rules and you're not potentially voiding your own policy or parts of your policy. And what's interesting is a lot of this actually avoids the need for your own business to carry some type of cryptocurrency account, because a lot of these ransomware events, they could be coming with different stipulations on what type of cryptocurrency that you're actually going to need to pay with. So it's not necessarily just Bitcoin. It could be Monero or Litecoin or various other privacy coins that are out there to try and avoid some sort of tracking or potential sanctioning from the government. Now, as I said before, it could be paid in multiple ways, by the insurer, by the vendor. Let's talk about restoration. That is really what a lot of businesses want to know about. So generally, a cyber insurance policy is going to say, hey, we're going to try and get you back up and operating to the level that you were at before this event occurred. Now, they're also going to try and help you regain access to that data. Part of that is trying to get the key. Part of that is, hey, if the keys are publicly available, just using that method as well. That would come from the forensics guy. But typically, there's going to be no increase in security. There are kind of a few like odds and ends policies out there that have some type of betterment clause, which essentially says, hey, we're going to get you up to a level to try and prevent this exact scenario from happening in the future. But those are exceedingly rare, and I haven't really seen those used. And I kind of question how valid those are, because obviously that's just more money the insurance company has to put out there. But nonetheless, do your own research, see if that's something that fits your particular scenario. And keep in mind that even when all this is going down, some of these files may actually just end up completely corrupted. So there is no promise that all of your files, even if you pay the ransom and you get the unlock key and everything goes completely smoothly, that all of the files that you have in your system are actually going to be restored, repairable, or even accessed. So with that, once again, another reason why backups are such a crucial ingredient to that defense in-depth strategy. All right, now let's talk about business interruption costs. All right, with those business interruption costs, obviously there are rules to this. One of the things you need to look at inside of your cyber policy is, hey, what's the waiting period on this? Now, I've seen a lot of different waiting periods. A waiting period is essentially how long between, either A, from when the event occurred to when reimbursement starts, or from when you reported the event to when the actual reimbursement starts. A lot of SMBs are going to see something in the neighborhood of, say, like 8 hours. I have seen some especially egregious policies that have up to 5 days in there, which I wouldn't really recommend except in very specific circumstances. But you need to make sure you actually understand what that waiting period is, because that's going to have a direct economic impact on your business. Now, businesses need to evidence some type of loss. So when you're going to go back to the insurance company, you're going to say, hey, we want to be reimbursed for this business interruption that would incurred in the funds that we couldn't generate while our system was down. You have to provide evidence for that. So some policies will actually have some sublimit, usually like $50,000, where a forensic accounting firm will actually come in and help you fill out the paperwork and evidence that particular loss. Now, generally, what is this? It's what you made during this last period of time, right? So we'll say last year or last month, minus what you're actually making now, and that delta is going to be what the business interruption reimbursement is actually for. Obviously, check your own policy to make sure there. Next is going to be reputational harm. So once again, there are rules to this. So check your own policy to see what the rules are. Once again, there is a waiting period for this, and the business needs to evidence the loss. It may require some proof of publication somewhere. So you have to look at your own policy, see what the rules say, but it may say, hey, if you lose clients because the breach was published in the newspaper or somewhere online, and you can show some link between this getting out and clients leaving your business, you may actually get reimbursed for that loss. Now, once again, you have to evidence that loss. Some policies out there are going to have that same forensic accountant come in, and kind of the same rules apply. Hey, what'd you make last period minus what are you making now? That's the reputational harm. This is actually particularly useful, especially for businesses. If you think clients are going to leave following a breach, it kind of gives you a nice little cushion. Typically, that's only going to be about 180 days max. That's the longest I've seen, where the cyber insurance company is going to reimburse you for that lost revenue. But that kind of gives you a nice little cushion there to actually try and either bring those clients back in or bring in new clients to try and minimize the loss there. Of course, if you're an SMB out there and you're like, hey, I have people relying on this business. Those people have families that they have to feed. That's really useful to try and help you minimize the possibility that you have to lay people off just to keep the business afloat. So it's something you should actually look into. Now, circumstantially, client notification and credit monitoring. So it may actually be legally required. Sometimes the forensics guys, they just can't make a determination. So they can't, say one way or another if there was some weird outflow of information or some PII, PCI, or PHI was actually stolen from the business. They just don't know, and there's just not enough information there to really try and make that legal determination and advise your attorney and your business appropriately. So that's kind of something to keep in mind. Now, as I said, this may just be practical. So there could be some voluntary notification provision inside of your policy. So it's really, you're just playing it safe, right? And you're going, okay, we don't really know here, but we need to play it safe. The attorney could be saying in this circumstance, because we don't know, we're going to advise the company just to put out credit monitoring and breach notification letters to your clients, just to play it safe to make sure that we're not running afoul of any state regulators, because obviously those fines and penalties can be quite large. Now, with all of this, there are various other limits to cyber insurance that are just kind of inherent and built into the policy. I'll put a link in the description below because I can only pin so many videos. I think it's only one per video here. So I'll put a link in the description below, and you guys can actually watch that video and see some of the other limits of cyber insurance, because obviously what I've shown here, that doesn't cover all the potential losses that your business could experience. So make sure you keep that in mind. And finally, just take heed. So obviously we spoke about that OFAC notice. In some circumstances, it may be illegal for you to actually pay the ransom. There is some provision, I believe, in that notice put out by OFAC that you can appeal that, but they also say that I believe you just have to presume you're going to be denied. In a practical sense, not to be cynical here, but if you're a multi-billion-dollar multinational organization, you get hit with ransomware, yeah, OFAC is probably going to let you slide by and pay that ransom. If you're a mom and pop shop, you're an SMB somewhere, I don't think OFAC is going to give you the time of day. So keep that in mind. The other thing you have to worry about is obviously erosion of policy limits. So make sure you have the appropriate limits. Make sure you have enough in the bank there on that policy so that if you get hit with ransomware, say once or twice a year, you're going to be covered. If you get hit with ransomware once, you got to pay for that and all the potential resultant losses there. And let's say later on in the year, you could have a data breach event where covered information is actually stolen. Make sure that you're kind of accounting for that within the policy limits. You don't want to test that limit adequacy. That's not a good feeling. So really the last thing you want is, and I've seen this before, a company, they really kind of scrounge on that limits. They're trying to save some cash there, which I understand. And then, hey, within the first 2 weeks, you've essentially extinguished the limits on your policy because you had some bad thing happen. And now you have to hope the whole rest of the year you're not going to get hit and need some additional insurance on that you don't have. So make sure you keep that in mind. Also, you don't want to be testing out that application. So defense in depth, defense in depth, defense in depth. All right, other avenues that could lead to ransomware. So these are kind of some of the other things that I think that businesses really need to be aware of, because there's kind of some other avenues that require protection there for that business. So obviously any sort of cloud compromises, insider threats, which are growing, various forms of phishing attacks, business email compromises, all of those are avenues that can lead to ransomware actually being infecting your system. So talk to your IT, talk to your MSP, see how you're working through the various controls, what kind of countermeasures you have in place to try and minimize the odds of those particular circumstances befalling your business. Next, let's talk about some of those reasonable cybersecurity controls you need to talk to your IT guy or your MSP about. 2FA, MFA, security awareness training, network segmentation permissions, classification of data to make sure that you can actually kind of lock down that segmentation and give permissions to the right people to access that data. Appropriate backups, the 3-2-1 rule, and periodicity. I'm not going to really dive into that there, but go ahead and do a quick internet search. You'll figure that out. Dark web monitoring, have a breach response plan. So as I said before, cyber insurance is really kind of like the last thing you want to rely on, but when you need to rely on it, you need to make sure you got the right thing and you know how that plan is supposed to play out. You know who's in charge of what, so that way you're not just generating additional stress and conflict in an already stressful environment. All right, moving forward, here we go. I've said it 1,000 times. Talk to your IT, talk to your MSP. Make sure that you have those appropriate controls in place. Do your best to really try and minimize the odds of a ransomware event hitting your business. You only want to call me once a year. You probably don't want to talk to me twice a year. I don't really get a lot of phone calls of people calling me, telling me good news. It's generally either, hey, I have a policy that needs to be renewed. Let's chat about it, which is awesome. I love doing that. Or B, something bad has happened. I need your help. And those are never really quite that fun. Obviously, train your people. That's going to be, number one, right? Make sure your people understand what those threats are. If your people aren't doing some sort of, formalized security awareness training, I think that's a big gap in security, and it's very easy to solve and it's very affordable. Next, just make sure you get the right cyber insurance policy and you actually understand it. So at the end of this presentation, you could download a free copy of my book, and that'll really kind of help you uncover a lot of potential coverages that you may be lacking, or understanding your actual cyber insurance policy, or even really delving into that regulatory side to help you there. And if you're ever in doubt about any of this, as I said before, I am not giving official insurance or legal advice. If you'd like that, go ahead and reach out to competent legal counsel and they should be able to assist you. All right, with that, if you enjoyed this presentation, that is Damage Control Cyber Insurance Compliance, about 500 pages of my latest book of everything you wanted to know about those topics. You can download it for free at the link there. And if you'd like to keep the wife happy, it is available in physical and Kindle version on Amazon. With that, stay safe out there. Ransomware is really getting everybody. Go ahead and feel free to like, share, comment, subscribe, share this presentation with your buddies, anybody else you think that would benefit from this, to try and keep them out of trouble. And with that, stay safe.